Saying that a video game is dying is a pretty big statement. It is something that has been said about countless games throughout history, but is it ever really true? It would be a fair statement to say that the game Skate 3, for example, is dead, where the player base is insanely low and there's practically no sales of the game nowadays. But the game still performed extremely well around release, and the company that made it, including its mother company EA, is still going to this day and haven't gone bankrupt, and they are currently working on a sequel to the game. Does that mean that the game is truly dead, or has it merely lost its main player base? And if so, does that still count the game as dead? Those questions are really up to interpretation, but the question on if a game is dying is not the same as if a game is dead. A game that is on the verge of starting to die out is also something that is related, but not really the same thing, which is where I would put Dead by Daylight under. Now, is Dead by Daylight numerically dying, meaning are they losing their player base? The answer to that question is unfortunately yes. The past month, DBD has lost 10% of Steam players, which rounds up to about 3,250 players. This statistic does not include Epic Games or console players, however, but you might get the idea. The game has slowly lost a portion of its player base, where it was at around 50,000 in October of 2021, and it is right now at 29,700. This might not sound like a lot, but the last time that Dead by Daylight had less than 30,000 concurrent players on Steam was in February of 2020, and that begs the question, why? This is not a question that is ever going to be easy to answer, and albeit could possibly be impossible to answer. Is it because of unpopular chapter releases? Is it because of bad updates? Does it have anything to do with monetization and licenses, or people just generally getting bored? There's a lot of questions, but trying to find the actual answer to why DBD could possibly be dying requires you to group up these questions, try to see the whole picture, but also looking beyond them. Because it's not only about the game itself, it is also about marketing, the player base, and the developers. Before I continue though, I want to bring forward two important points that might be recurring and relevant throughout the video. The first one is that I will be drawing parallels, especially when it comes to balancing between Dead by Daylight and League of Legends. League of Legends being a game where Riot Games are experts at keeping the player base and making good updates to the game. But it is also a game that I have followed personally for a long time and have reached a skill level of high enough where I actually understand the updates and why they are good or bad or needed to be done to the actual game. The second and most important one is that I am not a developer or game designer. I have no history making any games or balancing them, so do take everything I say with a grain of salt, but at the same time, I don't think that my opinions or views on this subject are bad or wrong. You wouldn't tell a carpenter how to make a table, but the carpenter still needs to take their customers' thoughts into consideration when making the table. And with that said, I will be moving on to the first topic, balance. Balance might at first glance seem pretty straightforward, nerf the things that are too good and buff the things that aren't as good, but it is a lot deeper than that. You have to take everything into consideration. You can nerf one thing, but that might indirectly make something else overpowered. Buffing something might make something weak even weaker and even more unviable, and this effect will get stronger with how the updates that Behaviour releases work. Every update consists of a variety of changes, and a lot of them, and not just one change at a time. There was a recent update, the 6.7.0 patch, that heavily nerfed healing. Does this mean that the plague didn't get affected? Yes, in a way, because healing has never ever really been a part of playing against her, but they also basically killed Dead Hard, a second chance perk that can make the killer have to hit you 3 times in order to down you compared to the normal 2. And with the old Dead Hard, you, as a survivor, had the chance to get downed in 2 hits against the plague while fully infected, compared to just 1, since you were permanently injured. But with the new Dead Hard, that isn't really viable, which indirectly buffs the Plague. Even though not every survivor every game was using Dead Hard against the Plague, it was a perk that was used so often that it had a place in countering Plague. That is simply how balance works in a PvP game that uses perks, items, abilities, damage numbers, and any variation or asymmetricality that the game might be using. Everything is always going to be relative to something else. There is a handful of people in the DBD community that is saying that the balancing changes that Behaviour does, and especially the most recent ones, is making the game more unfun, and that state of balance in the game will just make it bland and boring. This isn't really a flat truth or as simple as they put it, but there is definitely a point that is to be made there. I don't think the problem is the balance itself. I think it is more about Behaviour making changes that removes interesting or fun playstyles. The individuality and personal playstyles are getting removed, and it is something that has been happening for a little while. The biggest one that happened recently being the removal of Dead Hard. Now, I know that it didn't actually remove Dead Hard, but claiming that the perk even has the slightest of usability or playstyle like it had before is just wrong. With Dead Hard, there came a certain playstyle. When being in chase, it focused on the interactions of the PvP playstyle, and using Dead Hard in a way where you extend chase by outsmarting your opponent and using it at the right time, whereas a killer you try to play around the Dead Hard. And with the new Dead Hard, you will not get these opportunities because you have to get through a handful of steps before your Dead Hard even activates, and when it's activated, once you've used it, it gets deactivated again, which of course creates a situation where you will not be able to use Dead Hard every single game, and you won't be able to use it in an effective way anymore, because you might have a teammate that is on hook and you have to unhook them in order to get your Dead Hard, but there might be another player in your team that is going and unhooking that person. So it's very uncertain if you're even going to be able to actually activate the perk to be able to use it later on. There is a content creator that you may have heard of called Neymeti. Neymeti has basically invented his own playstyle and build, where he would use Object of Obsession and Medal of Man in order to always see the aura of the killer when the killer is outside a 16 meter range of him. What elevated this playstyle was Dead Hard and Circle of Healing. He could take protection hits from his teammates, stacking Medal of Man, and going to his boon to heal himself to be able to utilize the build and continue to take protection hits. With the new Dead Hard and Circle of Healing, however, this playstyle is practically impossible to recreate, where it becomes a chore to constantly heal yourself and never being able to take a hit unless you're healthy. It is these niche, interesting playstyles that Behaviour are actively getting rid of, and instead of trying to balance the perks that are strong, like the old Dead Hard and Circle of Healing, they decide to do everything in their power to completely change and overhaul these perks, which in turn removes these playstyles that people enjoy. Who knows why they decide to do it, if it's just a lack of creativity trying to figure out how to make the perks or killers less oppressive, or if they just don't care enough to cherish people's enjoyment of the game. No matter the reason, what they are doing is just not working out. The recent nurse changes is a great example on how you can positively change a character. Nurse, one of the 3 most overpowered killers in this game, got a change, completely changing one of her main playstyles. The best playstyle for Nurse before the update was going perks that expose survivors and proceeding to blink to survivors and instantly downing them. They changed her, making it so that her blink attacks do not interact with debuffs, such as the exposed status effect or applying Sloppy Butcher, etc. Alongside this, they also changed some of her add-ons, but the most important change was making her blink attacks a special attack. This was, of course, a playstyle, playing perks that expose the survivors and proceeding to instantly down them. However, compared to the Neymeti playstyle that I just referenced, this one isn't really an interesting playstyle, and you could possibly not even call it a playstyle. It didn't change the way any nurse players actually play the game, and instead just made her even more oppressive. Getting rid of this, but not making perks that inflict exposed completely useless, is a great way to balance it out. You can still successfully use Devour Hope or make your choice on nurse if you want to, and going these perks, instead of making nurse even more overpowered, now instead actually creates an interesting playstyle and a whole new playstyle, where you can use an add-on such as Matchbox or Spasmodic Breath combined with the exposed perks, and you might actually change the way that you play the nurse throughout those trials. But for me and a lot of other people, it feels like with every step into the right direction, Behaviour takes 10 steps back. Skull Merchant, the current most recent killer, had an incredibly big problem on her release. Her 3-gen potential and potential to drag out games for 20 plus minutes was insane, combined with her chase potential being very weak. 3-genning, for those of you who don't know, is where a killer tries to patrol the 3 most close generators in the game, making sure that survivors will not be able to repair those generators by constantly pushing them off the generators and basically cancelling out the survivors from ever completing the last generator. Behaviour then did an update where they tried to make her chase potential better, and they also attempted to make sure that she couldn't use her drones in such an oppressive way that creates a huge 3-gen potential. A popular DBD creator by the name Hens333 made a video concerning this very topic on his Professor Hens channel, where he goes through the update that they made. I'll link the video in the description if you're interested in learning more about it. Simplified, the result of this update was that her 3-genning didn't really get changed and possibly got even stronger, and she could protect them even heavier with her increased chase potential. And this then spiraled into people disconnecting every time they see a Skull Merchant player, because most people do not want to sit in a 30-minute game playing against a killer that revolves around making the games 30 minutes long, when most games are usually between 10 and 15 minutes long. This, of course, creates a lot of controversy in the community, which brings me on to my next point on why the game is dying, and why balance changes are so bad. The community. Before we move on to this topic, I just want to say a quick things. I started this video a few weeks ago. I started making the script and whatever. It was quite some time ago, and I haven't worked that much on the video the past few weeks because I put like too much pressure on myself on making it really like cool and awesome and having amazing editing. So if you notice, the editing will be like a lot more like sleazy and lazy compared to like earlier in the video. But I'm personally completely fine with it. I just want this video to like go out. Some points that I can take up isn't anything that is maybe super accurate right now, as of now, with like new updates and stuff coming. But I will try to make it relevant regardless. Also be aware that I am now using a new microphone, so it will be different sound quality. And other than that, right now it is the 21st of May, and 2 days ago, or yesterday, they did an anniversary stream where they were like doing some reveals on content that we will see in the future. A lot of it is pretty good. The anti-camping things is like coming and it's way overdue. Same thing with the search bar, and there was the same thing with the automatic blood web and whatever. It's a lot of stuff that is coming out that is good and healthy, but it's at the same time really way overdue and should have been implemented a lot earlier in the game. Other than that, they revealed a new killer, which I am not super excited about. Seems like another killer that is just going to be based around like kind of like camping, survivor objectives, much like Skull Merchant and the Knight, but I won't comment on it because it's not released yet, but we'll see how it works. We'll see how it works out. So those are just some quick things I wanted to say, and we're gonna go back now to the video talking about the community. As I stated earlier, I come from the League of Legends community, a community that is infamous for its toxicity. The toxicity that you find in League, however, is very different from the one that I find in Dead by Daylight. A community that is filled with extremely sensitive and entitled people. Have you ever wondered why there is like 5 billion results of salty and entitled DBD players and streamers on YouTube? It is not only because that content gives a lot of views, it is also because there are so many examples of these types of players. The toxicity that you will find in a game like League of Legends is mainly built around shock value, who can come up with the most creative way of telling someone that they're shit at the game and etc. With there also being a small minority of players who go out of their day to ruin every game for as many people as possible. This, in my eyes, isn't really anything that shocks me anymore, since I'm so used to it, but the way that the DBD community behaves still to this day actually shocks and disgusts me in many ways. Adult human beings throwing personal harassment, doxing, slurs, wishing death on their kids just because of a playstyle that they play in a video game that they spend their own money on. People are playing a player versus player game where their goal is to win over other players. They then proceed to win the game, and then they get told by someone else to kill themselves. It's just the most vile, cringy, and disgusting shit that you can ever imagine. And people in this community are so entitled to the point where they feel like losing a game condones personal attacks. And that is just the very tip of the whole subject on how terrible this community really is. I have even made a video concerning a subject of a toxic streamer that is like harassing people for just like playing the game and whatever. There's so many examples of this very thing happening, and it's like just insane how much it actually happens. If you are a person that complains about the game, you complain about the balance or lack of fun or whatever, most likely you are contributing to the very problem you're complaining about, and there's nothing really anyone can do about that. There's no fixing this problem, and this problem being the developers' contact with the community. They do not know what changes they need to do or what changes people want, because the vocal minority seems to always win. This community isn't about using shock value to be toxic toward other people. They're using shock value to get their own opinions through to the developers. You're a camping Bubba player? You should kill yourself and stop playing this game, and I will dox you every day of your life until they remove the option to camp as Bubba. You got a 1000 game win streak on Blight, must be a camping, tunneling, low skilled player who is abusing Blight and low MMR in order to win games. The latter of these two examples is something that actually happened, and if you tone down the former example with a language, it wouldn't be impossible for it to happen either. What this creates isn't just a toxic loophole in the community, but it creates toxicity regarding the balancing. Nerfs should be nerfed, yeah, what about Dead Hard? Oh yeah, what about Eruption? Yeah, but survivors have Circle of Healing. Oh yeah, and killers can tunnel and camp. Oh yeah, but there are bully squads who ruin the game for killers. Yeah, but there is killers who target snipe streamers to ruin their game. Yeah, but teamwork is so strong that killers need to use that playstyle. Oh yeah, but that's just because the killers can slow down the game so much that survivors have to try hard. Yeah, but survivors have to try hard because every other killer is a blight or a spirit. And there is useless discussions that go on social media, and they never end. This obviously confuses the developers, and they really can't tell what the players actually think needs to be changed and how they need to change it. What quality of life changes need to be done, but why do the developers even need this information from the player base? It is their own game, right? The developers. Talking about what goes on behind the scenes in a video game company can be extremely difficult. It is just like any other workplace. It is very, very different in every single different one that exists. There are leaks floating around every week about different companies harassing and abusing their staff and developers, alongside other people connected to game companies treating their staff extremely poorly. This is not an issue as far as me or the public is aware in Behaviour Interactive, and I doubt that we will ever see any leaks about things like this happening, because they are a very good and nice and like progressive company that actually respects their staff. This is obviously a really positive thing, and it is pretty common knowledge that Behaviour is extremely supportive of minorities and oppressed groups, and for that they should have credit. No matter if you want to call it fake and that they are just doing it to please the masses, it is actually deeper than that, and they do not do that just to make themselves seem like the good guy. I strongly believe that them as a company has the well-being of their staff and players as their main priority. This doesn't mean that they care as much as we would hope they do about their own game and the growth of their game. There are a few flaws that I see with Behaviour's approach to Dead by Daylight. One of their biggest flaws when it comes to updates and changes are their fear of mistakes. This is definitely on the community, where the developers know that no matter what they do, there will be a part of the community that is going to throw shit at them because of the update, which influence the steps they take. It has come to the point where Behaviour are scared of making unpopular, harsh, or rash decisions, and instead instead of making a big update with a bunch of new interesting features and later on fixing the mistakes that might happen, they instead cave to the community and take very small and careful steps and don't really do anything that might actually influence the bigger part of the enjoyment of the game. This is what normal game companies do. Trial and errors. They implement stuff that might need to be tuned up or tuned down, but it is not the end of the world that something might be overpowered for a few weeks. What matters is that they come back around to try to fix their mistakes and learn from them. This is something that Behaviour is scared of. They are scared of making concrete decisions. They are scared of making these minor mistakes because they know the extreme amount of backlash they will get from the annoying vocal minority, aka the people who will complain about anything no matter what for attention. This is a fundamental problem. If you need an analogy connected to real life, it is essentially like parents who refuse to ever try to correct their kids and instead let their kids control their life. This leads to a certain type of entitled and spoiled behavior in the kids and the type of behavior you see on social media in the Dead by Daylight community. And now the developers are in a spot where they are scared of making the slightest change that doesn't surround accessibility options, something that will always be taken with grace from the community. If we cycle back to what I said before concerning the devs not caring about their own game, the biggest show of this is the amount of time it takes them to do heavily requested changes, and also their obsession with money. Every company, of course, needs to make a profit in order to make a profit. With video games, that is most often through revenue gained by people buying the game, sponsorships, and microtransaction. There are different ways to appeal to these three. Sale revenue is usually made with advertising and collabs or events surrounding the game. Sponsorship gains usually come from collabing with other video games, trying to merge the player base. And microtransaction gives the player something in return for spending money on the game. It doesn't take an economy major to understand that long term. What is important is a loyal and consistent player base, since someone who has spent 1,000 hours on a game during a 1-year period is more likely to spend money on the game compared to someone who might spend 100 hours throughout that same time period. This also means that having 50,000 concurrent players over a 6-month-long period is better than hovering around 20,000. In video games where microtransactions and hype over collabs is the main selling point, having fewer amounts of players will result in a fewer amount of players actually spending money on it. And why does this happen? If the developers are trying to please their players with the update, why is it losing a player base? It is exactly what I said earlier, the vocal minority, meaning the people who complain the most and have unpopular opinions will always win, because Behaviour do not understand their own game. There is no high MMR players who work on the game or that Behaviour tries to work with when it comes to balancing and changes, which means that nobody really understands what is good or bad from a perspective of counting in every type of player, whether it would be super low skilled or super high skilled players. Combined with this, Behaviour actually don't really play their game. There has been leaks from ex-employees that the actual developers and game designers at the Dead by Daylight department don't really play their game, which means that it's the player base that really influences what changes they do. The devs are obsessed with stats. How often a perk is picked, what the average amount of kills are per game with certain killers, etc, etc. And they balance their game around that. Theoretically, 1 month, if everyone stopped playing Trapper except the 5 best Trapper players in the world, and those 5 players average 80% kill rate in their games, the coming months they could hard nerf Trapper just because Behaviour mainly look at numbers when balancing their game and when they make arguments on why they nerfed certain stuff. There is no fundamental problem with this, but doing this combined with them not knowing what to change about an overused perk to make it less oppressive, and combined with them trying to cave to as many people as possible with their changes, creates an environment where stuff really doesn't improve the game and instead removes interesting playstyles and builds, as I discussed earlier. I will also touch shortly on a more taboo subject, and one that is a lot of the time overshadowed with other issues, which is sexualization and using tactics which romanticizes characters in order to increase sales. It's not anything new in the video gaming world, characters being overly sexualized and conforming to beauty standards, especially when it comes to skins that you buy with actual money. It's a sales tactic and one that works and is proven to work a lot of the time. If you're not part of the social media part of the Dead by Daylight community, you may not be aware of it, but there is a lot of discussions about certain characters, their skins, and how hot people think they are. Every time a new male character gets a shirtless skin, for example, there is always a huge amount of people that won't stop talking about it. I have had people in my chat multiple times talking about how attractive these characters are with these skins and whatever skins, this and that skin, which in itself isn't a problem. And that problem instead lies in a sort of vicious circle, where a big amount of sales get made because of these sexualized skins, which in return makes Behaviour do more of these skins. They get money from those sales, and back and forth and back and forth. I know that when it comes to Dead by Daylight, it is an 18+ game, and it isn't necessarily wrong what they do with this and that they actually do it. The problem here though is that this makes them care less about the amount of people who spend money on the game in general and instead focus on the numbers that these sexualized skins bring in particular, which in turn makes them care less about keeping the general player base number up, and instead they care about keeping people who spend money on the skins they find attractive, but also skins in general, because obviously it isn't only about if you find a skin attractive, it could be if the skin is cool or whatever. The problem just lays in that they put so much effort into these things compared to other things surrounding the game. This could possibly mean in Behaviour's eyes that the company isn't in a decline, because DBD having 29,000 concurrent players on average makes them the same amount of money as if they had those 50,000 concurrent players, just because those people who play for the attractiveness of the characters will not stop playing the game. This not only will kill the game, but them being obsessed with having control over the revenue they bring in instead of the enjoyment of the gameplay is causing problems. They no longer care about how to make people start playing the game and continuing to play the game, and instead focus on how to make the game enjoyable enough for the people who pay their salary and what skins they should do next. Of course, everything I'm saying here is up to interpretation. Who knows if I'm even the slightest right about this? I don't think I'm far off, and it's up to anyone's imagination on what might actually be good changes for the game. And I am aware that there are different parts of a game company. They don't all work on the same thing. They obviously have one part of the company that is working on designs for skins and etc. But if they put so much thought into the skins and how to conform to the visual pleasing of the game, that takes up so much time that could be spent on actually trying to make the gameplay fun as well as doing cool skin concepts. What do I think good changes for the game would be as a player who has invested a fair amount of time into the game, but also a fair amount of time analyzing updates on DBD and League of Legends and what needs to be done to engage the community in the game? This is obviously just something from my point of view. I can't give any suggested changes for certain perks and killers in this video since it would take too long. But I can give a general idea on some small changes that would be able to elevate the game a little bit more. And of course, as I was saying earlier, it shouldn't really be too much in the community's hands, except for accessibility changes to control the game and its changes. So this is just fully opinion based. But it's mostly talking points on some things that Behaviour should focus on with updates. Aside from the developers needing to assert some sort of dominance over the player base and the player base needing to calm down about their entitlement, there are some changes that are game related that I think would be good. Firstly, I think the lag advantage is an issue that gets looked over a bit too much. People mention it here and there, but the way it works is extremely unfair. Having high ping or high MS in an online multiplayer PvP game is supposed to be a disadvantage. Your internet connection is worse than your opponent's, so logically you should be in a disadvantage. This is not the case a lot of the time in DBD though, based on the fact on how the servers themselves work, with the killer basically being the host of the internet connection during the games. This can often create unfair hits that should never actually hit the player, which in these clips are me. I've had a lot of hand-to-hand experience with this lag issue, and it's never me who has the higher ping, it's always the killers. Camping and tunneling is something that has been present in the game since its release. The best method for killers to win games is to make sure that one survivor dies as soon as possible. The game is a 4v1 game balanced around it being 4v1, so the killer making it a 3v1 ASAP obviously creates an advantage. The best players in the world knows this, and you won't see a single high-level competitive game where the killer doesn't try to tunnel a survivor out. There has been many attempts to get rid of this, and the most recent example of this is making the old borrowed time base kit. How come that it's still so viable to tunnel? Why is it so easier for the killer? That again comes from incompetence and a lack of knowledge and creativity from the devs. They do everything in their power to make sure that some killers are unable to use their powers close to hook. Artists or twins, for example. Why? Because they think that it will work, which it doesn't. There are two heavily unused perks in the game that doesn't get used because they are essentially useless, which is Borrowed Time and Guardian. Borrowed Time increases the endurance you get from being unhooked to 20 seconds instead of 10, and Guardian hides the survivor's scratch marks and blood pools for 8 seconds and gives a haste boost. What stands in the way of Behaviour to make those two base kits and make them stronger? Why not give survivors endurance for 30 seconds, hide their blood pools, scratch marks and injury noises for the same duration, and also hide their ability to get their aura read by the killer? Would this be too overpowered? Why? Because you can't tunnel anymore? Because then survivors could abuse the endurance to take hits? These are the types of things that I mean with making mistakes. Maybe this would be overpowered. Maybe they would need to change it so that specific endurance effect only works when you don't take protection hits, or nerf survivors in some way to compensate for nerfing tunneling. Trial and error, that is what needs to be done, compared to changing it and then just straight up removing it. Something else that needs to be done is to make sure that the different playstyles that add a touch of fun to the players doesn't go under the radar and instead is encouraged, and the game balancing should be balanced around stuff like that instead of shutting them down and trying to make the game repetitive and linear. Behaviour definitely needs to start picking up a faster pace. The recent automatic blood web check accessibility options and the ability to search for perks is something that people have wanted to get implemented for years, and for some reason it took them years to do this pretty necessary change. And also stuff like the complete imbalance of perks. If you look at the top survivor perks that are being used, they are all really good and useful. If you take stuff like some exhaustion perks like Lithe or Sprint Burst and Windows of Opportunity maybe, and stuff like that, it is really nice perks that are really useful in every game. But there are so many perks that just never get used by survivors because they are useless. They might advocate for some fun playstyles, but they are so bad to the point where it's just not at all worth it. And that is the stuff that they have to do and focus on with balancing. Instead of trying to nerf the things that are good, they should try to balance it. They should try to change the really good things to make them less oppressive, but more than that, they need to really heavily change and buff the stuff that is never used, so you actually feel like you have more options on how you want to play from game to game. And if positive changes doesn't start coming soon, who knows? Within a year, we might be seeing the current player base being lower than 20,000. But that is a discussion that we hopefully will never have to have. Thank you guys for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed the video. It took a little bit longer than I would have wanted to make this, but it's my fault. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments about things you disagree with me with or agree with, and things that you think could like positively impact the game. If you're interested in seeing more content from me, feel free to subscribe. I also upload shorts on my YouTube channel that I also upload on TikTok. And other than that, you can find me on twitch.tv/I'mBappus, also linked in the description. And if you want to join my beautiful Discord community, feel free to do that with the link in the description. Also in the description, I will link a few videos about stuff that might be interesting to watch, that is related to some of the topics I was talking about. I will be linking some videos, but also I will be linking the hens video I referenced, and I will also be referencing a video where Neymeti shows off that specific playstyle that I was talking about. And I hope to see you in the future.